She adjusted the scratchy white wig, her fingers numb despite the thin gloves. 2 more hours. Just 2 more hours and she'd have another $20 toward Lily's tuition. $20 closer to keeping the promise she made to Michael before he died. That their daughter would have better. That she'd never have to know what it felt like to be desperate. Sarah's boots were a size too small. The event organizers had handed them out without asking and she didn't complain. Couldn't afford to complain. Every step sent a sharp pain through her toes, but she smiled anyway. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. The words became a mantra, hollow and automatic. A couple brushed past her, taking a candy cane without eye contact. She might as well have been a decoration. Another piece of holiday scenery. The market was alive with laughter, music, the smell of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine. Families bundled in expensive coats. Children squealing with delight. And Sarah stood at the edge of it all, clutching her basket like a lifeline, feeling the cold seep deeper with every passing minute. She thought about Michael, about how he'd hate seeing her like this. But Michael wasn't here anymore, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that across the market someone else was fighting a different kind of cold. Mason felt it too, not the temperature, something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with the December wind cutting through Oak Ridge. He stood at 6'4", shoulders broad enough to block out the Christmas lights behind him, scanning the crowd out of habit. Always scanning. Always calculating exits, threats, vulnerabilities. 2 years back from his last deployment and he still couldn't turn it off. Easy Bear. His voice was low, barely audible over the carolers. The German shepherd pressed against his leg, responded with a soft whine. 100 pounds of muscle and scars. A retired military working dog who'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. They were the same, really. 2 warriors trying to figure out how to exist in a world that didn't need them to fight anymore. Mason had come to the market because his therapist suggested it. Reintegration, she called it, exposure to normalcy, but nothing about this felt normal. The crowd pressed too close. The music was too loud. The laughter felt alien, like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. He tightened his grip on Bear's leash, drawing comfort from the solid presence beside him. 1 lap, then back to the cabin. Back to the silence that made sense. But sometimes the universe has other plans. Sarah didn't see them coming. The group of teenagers pushing through the crowd, led by a tall kid with an expensive haircut and a sneer that said he'd never been told no in his life. She recognized him, vaguely. The son of Roger Sterling, the real estate tycoon whose face was plastered on billboards all over town. The kind of kid who thought the world was his playground. They stopped right in front of her. The leader pulled out his phone, shoving the camera in her face. "Whoa, check this out. Hey guys, look at Mrs. Claus here. She looks like she got that costume from a dumpster." Heat flooded Sarah's face. Shame, anger, but mostly exhaustion. She tried to turn away. "Please, just let me do my job." The boy laughed. It was a cruel sound. "Move along or what? You gonna hit me with a candy cane?" She saw it coming. The shift in his posture. The glance at his friends, making sure they were watching. Making sure they were filming. And then his leg swung out, catching the heavy basket she was holding, driving it into her stomach with enough force to knock the air from her lungs. No, the word came out as a gasp. She slipped on a patch of ice, the world tilting sideways, and then she was down. Hard. The concrete punched through the cheap velvet, scraping her palms, her knees. Candy canes exploded across the cobblestones like shattered glass. Red and white fragments everywhere, beautiful and broken. For a moment there was only the sound of the boy's laughter, his friends joining in, the phone camera still rolling, capturing her humiliation for whatever social media platform would make it go viral. Sarah stayed down, her vision blurring, not from the fall, from something deeper, the realization that she'd become the kind of person people could kick without consequence. And then everything changed. The growl came first, low and thunderous, vibrating through the winter air like a warning from something ancient and dangerous. The laughter died instantly. Sarah looked up through the tears. She didn't know she was crying and saw the German shepherd, massive, battle-scarred, standing over her like a sentinel, lips pulled back to reveal teeth that promised violence. Behind the dog was a man, and something about him made Sarah's breath catch. Not fear, something else. He was huge, yes, but it wasn't his size that made the teenager step back. It was the way he moved, controlled, purposeful, like a predator who just spotted prey. Bare heel, the command was sharp, but then the man saw her on the ground, saw the boy winding up for another kick, and his entire demeanor shifted. Go. The dog launched forward, not to attack, but to intercept. He landed between Sarah and the teenager with a bark so ferocious it silenced the nearby crowd. The boy stumbled backward, his arrogance crumbling. Get that thing away from me. But the man was already there, stepping into the light. He didn't shout, didn't need to. His voice was low, dangerous, final. Back up. The authority in those two words was absolute. The kind of command that came from someone who'd given orders in places where disobedience meant death. The teenagers scattered like leaves in the wind, their bravado gone, leaving only their phone footage behind as evidence of their cowardice. And then the man turned to Sarah, his eyes steel gray and hard, softened just enough. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Sarah sat on the icy ground, surrounded by broken candy canes, trying to process what had just happened. The dog was still close, protective, but no longer aggressive. The man extended his hand. It was rough, calloused, a working hand, a warrior's hand. She hesitated, not from fear, from pride, from the last shred of dignity she had left. But the pain in her ankle was sharp, insistent. She reached up and took his hand. His grip was sure, pulling her to her feet with an ease that made her feel weightless. But the moment her right foot touched ground, white-hot pain shot through her leg. She gasped, her knees buckling. He caught her before she could fall again, his arm wrapping around her waist. "Easy, don't put weight on it." His voice had changed, gentle now, concerned. "I think that punk did some real damage." Sarah leaned against him, mortified by her own weakness but grateful for the support. And then the cold hit her. Without the adrenaline to keep it at bay, the December night cut through her thin costume like a blade. She started to shiver violently, her teeth chattering so hard she couldn't speak. The man frowned. Without a word, he unbuttoned his heavy wool coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was still warm from his body, and it swallowed her whole. "You're freezing." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she was fine, but she wasn't fine. Hadn't been fine in 2 years. So she just nodded, pulling the coat tighter, breathing in the scent of cedar and something else. Safety, maybe. Something she'd forgotten existed. "Can you walk?" he asked. Sarah tried, put the smallest amount of weight on her right foot and immediately regretted it. I don't think so." He didn't ask permission, just scooped her up in his arms like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. "There's a medical tent on the north side. We'll get that ankle looked at." She should have protested, should have insisted she could manage, but she was so tired, tired of managing, tired of being strong. So she let him carry her through the market, the dog walking beside them, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah let someone else take the weight. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that this man, this stranger, was carrying his own weight, and that saving her might be the first step in saving himself. His name was Mason. She learned that at the medical tent while a paramedic wrapped her ankle and declared it a bad sprain, not a break. He stayed the entire time, silent and watchful, the dog never leaving his side. When the paramedic finished, Mason helped her into a chair and crouched down in front of her. "You should file a report," he said. "That kid assaulted you." Sarah laughed. It was a bitter sound. "You know who his father is, Roger Sterling. The man owns half this town." She shook her head. "Filing a report would just make things worse." Mason's jaw tightened. She could see the anger there, controlled but present. "So he gets away with it. People like him always do." There was a long silence. Then Mason stood, pulling out his phone. "Give me your address." "What, why?" "Because you can't drive with that ankle, and I'm not leaving you here." Sarah wanted to argue, but her car was parked 3 blocks away, and the thought of hobbling through the cold was unbearable. So she gave him the address, and 20 minutes later, she was sitting in the passenger seat of his truck, Bear in the back, watching the Christmas lights blur past the window. Her apartment was small, third-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades. Mason carried her up the stairs without complaint, Bear following closely. When they reached her door, she fumbled for her keys, her hands still shaking from the cold. The apartment was modest but clean. Evidence of a child everywhere, drawings on the fridge, toys in the corner, a small Christmas tree with homemade ornaments. Mason set her down gently on the couch, and that's when a little girl appeared from the hallway. "Mommy." Lily was 7, with Sarah's brown hair and eyes that still held wonder. She froze when she saw Mason and the dog. "Who's that?" "This is Mason," Sarah said quickly. "And his dog, Bear. They helped Mommy when she got hurt." Lily's fear melted into curiosity. "Can I pet him?" Mason looked at Sarah, who nodded. "Bear, easy." The dog approached Lily slowly, tail wagging, and within seconds the little girl was giggling, her small hands buried in his fur. Mason watched them for a moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he turned to Sarah. "You should ice that ankle, elevate it, stay off it for at least 3 days." "I can't." Sarah's voice was quiet. "I have to work." "Not with that ankle, you don't." "You don't understand. I need the money. Lily's school." "I understand more than you think." Mason's voice was firm but not unkind. He pulled out his wallet, extracting several bills. "Take this." Sarah's pride flared. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity. Consider it payment for teaching me something tonight." "Teaching you what?" Mason looked at Lily, still playing with Bear, her laughter filling the small apartment. Then back at Sarah. "That there are still things worth protecting." He placed the money on the coffee table and stood. "Come on, Bear." The dog trotted over reluctantly, clearly enjoying Lily's attention. Mason clipped on his leash and they headed for the door. Sarah struggled to her feet, ignoring the pain. "Wait, at least let me give you back your coat." He paused in the doorway. "Keep it. I'll come by tomorrow to check on you." And then he was gone, leaving Sarah standing in her small apartment, wrapped in a stranger's coat, wondering why it felt like something had just shifted in her world. Something fundamental. Something she couldn't quite name but desperately needed. Outside in the truck, Mason sat in the darkness, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Bear whined from the passenger seat, sensing his tension. The noise in his head, the constant static that had followed him home from deployment, had quieted, just for a moment, just long enough for him to realize something terrifying. He wanted to go back inside, wanted to stay, wanted to protect them. And that scared him more than anything he'd faced overseas. Sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention or recognition. It simply exists in the quiet moments when someone chooses to stand up, or in this case, when someone chooses to help another stand. The next morning arrived with fresh snow and sharper cold. Sarah woke on the couch where she'd fallen asleep, her ankle throbbing, Mason's coat still wrapped around her like armor. Lily was already awake, making cereal in the kitchen, humming a Christmas song off-key. Sarah tried to stand, gasped at the pain, and sat back down, 3 days off her feet. Impossible. She had another shift at the market tonight. The rent was due in 5 days. The school tuition in 10. The math didn't work if she stayed home. But when she tried to put weight on her ankle, her vision went white with pain. The decision was made for her. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Sarah hobbled over, expecting maybe Mrs. Chen from downstairs or the mail carrier. Instead, she found Mason standing in the hallway, Bear at his side, holding a paper bag. "Checking in," he said simply. Like I promised. Sarah stepped back, letting them inside. Bear immediately found Lily, who squealed with delight, abandoning her coloring book to hug the dog. Mason set the bag on the kitchen counter. Groceries, some basics, figured you couldn't get out. Sarah's throat tightened. You didn't have to. How's the ankle? She looked down. Hurts, but I'll manage. Mason's eyes narrowed. You're planning to work tonight, aren't you? I don't have a choice. You do, just not when you want to take. There was frustration in his voice, but also understanding. He knew about impossible choices, about doing what needed to be done even when it broke you. He'd made plenty of those choices himself. He sat down at her small kitchen table, Bear settling at his feet. Tell me about your husband. The question caught Sarah off guard, but something about Mason's directness made lying impossible. So she told him. About Michael. About the accident that took him 2 years ago. About the life insurance that barely covered the funeral. About working 3 jobs to keep Lily in the good school district to give her the stability she needed. Mason listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You remind me of someone. Who? My mother. His voice was rough. She raised me alone, 3 jobs, never complained. I didn't understand until I was older how much she sacrificed. What happened to her? Cancer 5 years ago. Mason looked at his hands. I was deployed, couldn't get back in time. Sarah reached across the table, touching his hand. I'm sorry. He didn't pull away. She would have liked you, would have said you had spine. They sat like that for a while, 2 broken people sharing a moment of quiet understanding. Then Lily called from the living room. Can Bear stay forever? Mason smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Not forever, kiddo, but he can stay for a while. And he did. That afternoon, Mason didn't leave. He stayed, playing with Lily, fixing a loose cabinet hinge Sarah had been meaning to get to for months, and making dinner, spaghetti that was surprisingly good. They ate at the small table, and for a few hours Sarah let herself pretend. Pretend this was normal. Pretend they were a family. But reality has a way of creeping back in. After Lily went to bed, Sarah sat down at her laptop, pulling up her bank account. The numbers stared back at her, cold and unforgiving. Even without the lost income from the market, she was short, very short. Mason saw her face. What is it? She closed the laptop. Nothing, just budgeting. But he wasn't fooled. How short are you? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Sarah looked at him, this man she'd known for less than 24 hours, who somehow felt like he'd been in her life forever. Why do you care? Mason leaned back, his expression thoughtful. You know what the hardest part of coming home was? Realizing I didn't know how to be useful anymore. Overseas, my purpose was clear. Protect my team, complete the mission, come home. He paused. But here, I don't have a mission, don't have a team, just me and Bear trying to figure out what comes next. And helping me is your mission. Maybe. Or maybe you're helping me figure out I still have value beyond what I can do with a rifle. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes. I can't take more of your money, Mason. Then don't think of it as taking. Think of it as letting me invest in something that matters. Before she could argue, he pulled out his phone, typed for a moment, then showed her the screen. It was a payment confirmation. Enough to cover her rent and Lily's tuition. Too late, already sent. Sarah stared at the screen, then at him. I can't. You can, you will. And someday when Lily's grown and doing amazing things, you'll remember that accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you smart. She wanted to fight him, wanted to maintain her pride, but instead she did something unexpected. She stood up, crossed the small space between them and hugged him, just wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders and held on. Mason stiffened for a moment, surprised. Then his arms came around her, and they stood like that in her tiny kitchen, two people who'd been alone for far too long, finding unexpected comfort in each other. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Don't thank me yet." Mason's voice was low against her hair. "You're going to have to put up with me checking in, making sure you're healing right, making sure that punk doesn't come back." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." And for the first time since Michael died, Sarah felt something she'd thought was gone forever: hope. But hope is a fragile thing, and neither of them knew that the next few days would test it in ways they couldn't imagine. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah was on the couch, ankle elevated as ordered, when someone knocked. Mason had left an hour earlier. He had an appointment at the VA, something about his disability claim, so she hobbled to the door alone. Roger Sterling stood in the hallway, expensive suit, practiced smile, the man whose son had put her in this position. "Mrs. Garrett, I presume." His voice was smooth, calculated. "May I come in?" Every instinct told her to slam the door, but curiosity won. "What do you want?" Sterling entered without waiting for permission, his eyes scanning the modest apartment with barely concealed disdain. "I understand there was an incident at the Christmas market involving my son, Dylan." "You could call it that. I've seen the video. Dylan showed me, and I want to apologize." Sarah blinked. "Apologize?" "Boys will be boys, of course, but what happened was inappropriate." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I'd like to offer you a settlement, $10,000, in exchange for your agreement not to press charges or speak publicly about the incident." Sarah stared at the envelope. $10,000, more than she made in 6 months, enough to stop drowning for a while. "You're trying to buy my silence." "I'm trying to make things right. The money comes with no strings attached beyond the standard non-disclosure agreement." He placed the envelope on the coffee table. "Think about your daughter. This could help with her education." And there it was, the knife twisted just right, using Lily as leverage. Sarah picked up the envelope. For a moment Sterling's smile widened. Then she handed it back to him. "Get out." His smile vanished. "Excuse me." "I said get out. Your son assaulted me, humiliated me, and you think you can throw money at it and make it disappear?" Sarah stood despite the pain in her ankle. "I don't want your blood money. I want your son to learn that actions have consequences." Sterling's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Garrett. I'm offering you more money than you'll see in years. Turn it down and you'll regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. This town runs on my decisions. Your landlord, I own this building. Your daughter's school, I'm on the board. Make an enemy of me and you'll find life very difficult." Sarah felt ice in her veins, but she didn't back down. "Then I guess life's about to get difficult. Now get out before I call the police." Sterling left, but his parting words hung in the air like poison. "You'll change your mind. They always do." Sarah sank back onto the couch, shaking, not from fear, from rage, and from the terrible knowledge that he might be right. She just turned down $10,000 out of pride, out of principle, but principles didn't pay rent. When Mason returned that afternoon and she told him what happened, his reaction was immediate and intense. "He came here, to your home." "It's fine, I handled it." "It's not fine, Sarah. He threatened you, threatened Lily's school." "What am I supposed to do, Mason? Take his money, prove that he was right, that everything has a price?" Mason paced her small living room, Bear watching him nervously. "No, but you also don't have to fight this alone." "I'm not asking you to fight my battles." "I know, but I'm offering anyway." Something in his voice made Sarah look at him closely. "What are you thinking?" Mason stopped packing. "Sterling threatened you because he thinks you're vulnerable, alone. Let me make some calls." "To who?" "People I trust, people who know how to handle men like Sterling." Sarah felt a chill. "Mason, I don't want violence." Neither do I, but there are other ways to fight. Legal ways. Sterling built his empire on dirty deals and intimidation. Guys like that always have skeletons. We just need to find them. Over the next 3 days, Mason became a man on a mission. He made calls, met with people Sarah never saw. Bear stayed with her and Lily during the days, a comforting presence that made Lily laugh and made Sarah feel safe. And every evening Mason returned, sometimes with Chinese takeout, sometimes with pizza, always with an update. "Found something," he said on the third night, pulling out his laptop. "Sterling's been using shell companies to dodge taxes, and he's got a pending lawsuit from a family whose land he seized through eminent domain fraud." Sarah looked at the documents he showed her. "How did you get these?" "I have friends in interesting places. This information is public record, just buried deep enough that no one's bothered to look." "What do we do with it?" Mason smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "We give it to someone who'll care, a journalist friend of mine at the state paper. She's been looking for a story like this." Sarah felt a flutter of hope mixed with fear. "Sterling will know it came from me." "Let him know. By the time this breaks, he'll have bigger problems than one woman he tried to intimidate." The story broke 2 days before Christmas. Real estate mogul FACES tax evasion investigation. The fallout was immediate. Sterling's business partners started distancing themselves. The school board launched an ethics review. And Dylan Sterling, the boy who'd kicked Sarah's basket, found himself suddenly very unpopular at his private school. Mason showed Sarah the article on his phone. "Sometimes justice takes time, but it comes." Sarah read it twice, hardly believing it was real. "You did this for me." "I did it because it was right." But there was more to it than that, and they both knew it. Mason had found his mission again, and that mission was protecting the people who'd given him a reason to keep fighting. That night after Lily went to bed, Sarah and Mason sat on the couch, Bear sprawled at their feet. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the corner, casting soft shadows. "I leave in 4 days," Mason said quietly. "Orders came through, back to base." Sarah's heart sank. She'd known this was coming, knew he couldn't stay forever, but the reality of it still hurt. "Where are you going?" "Can't say, but it's overseas. 6-month deployment minimum." 6 months an eternity. Sarah looked at her hands. Will you come back?" Mason turned to face her, his expression serious. "Sarah, I've been deployed 7 times, seen things that would break most people, and I always came back because I had to, because it was my job." He reached out, taking her hand. "But this time I'm coming back because I want to, because there's something here worth coming back to." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. "We barely know each other. I know you're strong. Know you'd do anything for your daughter. Know you'd rather starve than compromise your principles. That's enough." "Is it?" Mason wiped her tears with his thumb. "I don't know what this is, Sarah. Don't know if it's just 2 broken people finding comfort or something more. But I know I want to find out. And I know I'm willing to wait however long it takes." Sarah leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just existing in the quiet certainty that something had shifted between them. Something neither of them could name but both of them felt. On Christmas Eve, Mason picked them up early. He'd made plans, he said. A surprise. They drove out of town, past the city limits, into the woods. Sarah was about to ask where they were going when she saw it. A small cabin, smoke rising from the chimney, Christmas lights strung along the porch. "What is this?" she asked. "My place, bought it when I got back. Somewhere quiet, somewhere the noise couldn't reach me." He helped her out of the truck, Lily bouncing with excitement. "Thought you might want to spend Christmas somewhere that didn't feel like your apartment." Inside, the cabin was warm and rustic. A fire crackled in the fireplace. A small tree stood in the corner, decorated simply, and on the table was more food than Sarah had seen in months. "Mason, this is too much." "It's not enough," but it's what I've got." They spent the day together. Lily played with Bear, who wore a ridiculous red bow around his neck. Sarah and Mason cooked together, their shoulders brushing in the small kitchen. And for the first time in 2 years, Christmas didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to celebrate. Late that night, after Lily fell asleep on the couch, Sarah and Mason stood on the porch, watching snow fall in the darkness. "I have something for you," Sarah said quietly. She handed him a small box. Inside was a leather dog collar with a brass nameplate. Bear was engraved on it, and underneath a phone number, her phone number. Mason stared at it, his throat tight. "Sarah." "So he knows where home is," she said softly. "So you both do." Mason couldn't speak. So he did the only thing he could. He pulled her close, pressed his forehead to hers, and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I will come back," he whispered. "I promise you, this is my home now." And Sarah believed him, not because she was naive, but because for the first time in longer than she could remember, she'd found something worth believing in. The next morning, Mason had to leave, had to report to base. The goodbyes were harder than either of them expected. Lily cried, Bear whined, and Sarah stood on the porch, watching his truck disappear down the snowy road, wrapped in his coat, believing in a promise from a man she'd known for less than 2 weeks. Sometimes the strongest connections form in the shortest time. Sometimes a stranger becomes family faster than blood. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. It simply waits. It simply believes. Sarah Garrett stood in the falling snow, a widow who'd been kicked down and gotten back up, a mother who'd refused to compromise her principles for convenience, a woman who'd found unexpected strength in the most unexpected place. And Mason drove toward his deployment, a warrior who'd found his mission in a woman and child who'd reminded him that some battles are worth fighting, that some promises are worth keeping, that sometimes home isn't a place, it's people. Bear wore his new collar, the tag jingling with every bump in the road. On it was a phone number, a lifeline, a promise, a reminder that no matter how far they went, they knew exactly where they belonged. Sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself with grand gestures. It doesn't demand recognition or applause. It simply exists in the quiet moments, in the choice to stand up when it would be easier to stay down, in the decision to help when it would be simpler to walk away, in the promise to return when it would be safer to forget. And sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with integrity, with compassion, with the quiet certainty that some things, some people, are worth protecting no matter the cost. Sarah would wait, Mason would return, and Bear would remind them both that home was waiting. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and in acting it changes everything.